Right, okay. Finally there is sound. I've now got to wait 15 seconds for the internet to catch up. I'm just going to type in the chat because light travels faster than sound. Right, that's 5 minutes wasted. Well done. I am actually going to have to crop this now at the end of it, so for people watching not live, yes, there's no sound. Sorry. Right, let me go through all that again. I said many wise and wonderful things. The first thing I will French mime, we were nearly getting there, weren't we? So right, I'll explain what has happened is I use this to record off like Prime Minister's questions. Sometimes I record things so that I can then either watch them back later, or occasionally, I very rarely, as you know, use clips in my videos, but occasionally I will use a clip, and it is this program I use to record it. And obviously if I'm recording something, I don't want background noises, so I just turn the microphone off. So what happened was I was talking, and then I saw the messages about no sound, but I didn't see them immediately because I'd gone to the top to answer the first few questions. And so I turned the microphone icon on and thought it was sound again, and I carried on rabbiting like I do. And for some reason, it hadn't switched to the proper microphone. I don't know which microphone it has switched to. I'll investigate that later, but it had not switched to the correct one. Anyway, I did say in my first video today that my technology was trolling me today. But there is an announcement for the start of it, which is there won't be a stream this time next week with or without sound, because I will be out of the house. I will not even be in the same county. I will be in a part of the country where they don't even know how to pronounce basic words like glass or laugh. So it's going to be quite stressful for me. But I will put a stream on Thursday evening, which is going to be quite a busy day for me now, because not only do I need to try and get Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays videos all done and up in advance, and I have to hope that there's no breaking news on Friday, Saturday or Sunday, otherwise I'm not going to talk about it because I won't be here. But apparently I'm going to listen to Keir Starmer speak on Thursday as well, because he's in my neck of the woods, so yeah, it's all very complicated. But I was going through the first few questions. Now that I'm satisfied there's sound, I dare scroll back up to the top. So there were a couple of quick questions about CPTPP. Matthew saying, should Labour pledge to withdraw from CPTPP in the manifesto? So first of all, not no, because there is only one reason to withdraw from CPTPP, and that is to rejoin the EU. And obviously they can't commit to rejoin the EU until, first of all, key voters want it, but just as important, the Conservative Party in favour of it. Remember, if the Conservatives say no, Labour physically, even in government with a massive, if they had a majority of 100, it doesn't matter. They can't rejoin the EU, because they would go to the EU and say, can we start talks to rejoin? They will say no. First of all, they'll say no because we don't trust you, so we've got to build up the trust. But second of all, they'll say no because what happens if you lose the next election? These accession talks take years, by the way. It takes years to join the EU. Doesn't matter that we were only just members recently. Irrelevant. It takes years. And if we, obviously, like with any of our other trade deals, if we agree to all the terms, we can join much more quickly. But we're going to have lots of difficult conversations about, say, currency, for example. So the EU will say, well, what happens if you lose the next election? The Conservatives come back in and they just wreck all the progress, and they just, you know, so we need to know that the UK wants to join, not just the current party of government, the UK. And people need to understand that. When people are moaning at Labour, they do need to understand that. You know, I will persuade people. My focus when I'm trying to persuade people about Brexit is people, not politicians. The politicians, I don't care what the politicians think of it. I really don't care. The politicians who want to win will adopt whatever policy will help them win. So they will adopt a policy of wanting to rejoin the EU as soon as that becomes the way to win an election. But then M said there that I think Labour are going to have to remove us from the CPTPP and start talks with the EU. Perhaps it might be in our interest to join Schengen at some point if it's possible. So first of all, again, on the CPTPP issue, we don't have to leave that to start joining the EU. We have to leave it, obviously, before we get to the later stages. But it only takes 6 months. If you want to leave the bloc, you just give 6 months notice, done. And it's not like leaving the EU, which ended up being a complex matter that took years and still was arsed up in the end. You know, it's not a very close relationship with the CPTPP. We just leave it. We don't even lose very much because we've already got trade deals with virtually all of them. And by the time we leave, we might have trade deals with actually all of them. So it doesn't matter. But the other thing about Labour having to leave and start talk, you wouldn't leave it when you start talks. You'd leave it later. You don't need to rush it. It takes a lot longer than 6 months. And Labour won't start talks on rejoining the EU in the next Parliament. That's the reason why they're able to rule it out now. Because it's not credible. They can't. Until the public are much more until the electoral strategy has to include rejoining the EU. It can't happen. Right. It's unlikely any Labour candidate will win in Islington North if Corbyn runs as an independent. So is it likely Labour will not run a candidate against Jeremy Corbyn at the next general election? Well, I'll tell you the way it seems to be turning out. See, I've got no idea. In all honesty, I have no idea. See, there's pros and cons here. First of all, Jeremy Corbyn is genuinely popular in his constituency. So if he ran as an independent, could he win? Of course he could, in theory. However, running against that is the idea that, first of all, most people do vote for the party. And second of all, because you're looking at a change of government, because there will be extra people voting at the next election because there's a change in the air. So that'll count against him. Now, which one wins? I don't know, other than I will say this. There's still a battle raging. There's people close to Jeremy Corbyn urging him to stand, and there's other ones urging him not to stand. But the latest we're getting from people who are close to him is that he probably won't stand because he doesn't actually seem to have much chance of winning. In other words, the constituency, according to some people close to him, is much more Labour than it is Corbyn. But if he did decide to stand as an independent, I would feel sorry for the candidate because they actually, Labour might struggle to get a decent candidate because they are going to face very, very unpleasant people. We saw what Batley and Spen, Joe Cox's sister, Kim Ledbetter, had to deal with from George Galloway's gang. Physical intimidation, assaults even. It'd be ramped up to 11, someone standing against Corbyn. It really would. But it may well be he doesn't stand. And he doesn't need to. Not only is he in his 70s, he does loads of other things as well. He's part of all these groups around the world. Why does he just do that? He spends a lot of his time doing that anyway. I don't know why he wouldn't just want to do that. What does he even want to be an MP for goodness sake? He derives no benefit from being an MP these days. I really don't see what he even wants to be an MP for. It's just a mark of the man that just hasn't changed his mind in so long. But anyway. Light travels faster than sound, scientifically inept for digital transmission. Nonetheless, my typing got to you quicker than my sound. But anyway, that's all I know on that one. Really, we'll just have to wait and see. Can I explain to me how exactly Starmer is supposed to have reneged on all of his leadership pledges, please? No one has properly and clearly laid out how he has. Well, he hasn't, that's why. So I have the thing around somewhere, but I'm not sure where it is. I always usually keep it handy, but I'm in a right mess at the moment. But essentially, so Keir Starmer made 2 pledges, and then he had 10 positions. So there were 10, the 10 what people call pledges were never pledges. They were his position, what he personally believes in. But what the leader personally believes in is not the same as what the party will have as policies. I will admit there was a deliberate intention to allow people to think the two were the same. But nonetheless, if you read the film, there were 2 pledges, and it was quite clear there were 2 pledges, and the 2 pledges were unite the party and put the party in a position to win the next election. Well, yes. And I was having a disagreement with someone today who was saying, well, they're not united the party, there's all these people voting. But the thing is, the people who are not a united part of Labour right now are the people who are not united with anyone. You know, the people who were attacking Starmer before he even became leader, they were already making it clear they won't vote for him. How do you include people that don't want to be included? You can't. So when you talk about uniting the party, all you can mean is uniting the people who want to be part of a united party. The people we're talking about, the pro-Corbyn crew, are they refuse to work with anyone who is not exactly the same as them. In fact, you can see they're even turning on each other. The 2 Johns, they've turned on the 2 Johns in the last week. John Landsman, who's the founder of Momentum, basically, or the original chair of Momentum, while Corbyn was leader, and John McDonnell. They've turned on those 2 for not being sufficiently outraged at what's happened to Jeremy Corbyn. So, you know, but that's where we'd go. And again, at this point, I say, like, I don't like the factionalism. You know, I don't like the people who are just holding up Jeremy Corbyn as this cult leader. But also, I don't like the people who seem to be delighting in the fact that, you know, these people are also like gnashing their teeth. I just wish people would actually just work together against the common problem, which is a Conservative government. So I don't like to stoke the fires at all, but at the same time, sometimes you have no choice. Some people just don't want to, you know. And the thing about the factions as well is, if there's going to be a faction that's in a dominant position, it might as well be the one that's in line with the way voters think. That's the problem with the hard left. They don't understand that. It's not just that they represent a faction that delights in screwing over other factions. They're out of step with voters. You know, there's nothing going for them. But anyway, party politics aside, it's all a nonsense, and it is a nonsense as well. It's never going to feature in the news, really. You might see something in The Guardian. The Guardian sometimes reports on Labour infighting, but it's really not news. And someone, I can't remember who, someone linked me, there was a clip of someone from Navarra Media, I can't remember who it was, or someone from that sort of crew, who was on GB News apparently. Is it Walker? Can't remember. And they were going on about how unfair Jeremy Corbyn's been treated. I'm just thinking, you do realise you're actually helping Starmer out here, don't you? You do realise that. Because the sort of people that Labour are targeting, and some of them may watch GB News, the sort of people that Labour are targeting, because you've got to think about, who are they targeting? They're targeting the people who voted Conservative at the last election. Who are those people? They're people who hate Jeremy Corbyn. They hate Jeremy Corbyn. It really doesn't matter whether someone thinks that's, you know, justified or not. They do. It's a fact. So if you go on telly, particularly Gammon News, to complain about Jeremy Corbyn being treated badly, that's actually making Keir Starmer look really good. So, nice one. That's the thing though, some of these people are thick. They're seriously thick. They really don't understand the first thing about politics. They shoot themselves in the foot every time, which was a huge problem when they were in charge of the Labour Party, a massive problem, But now that they're not, it's much less of a problem. It's unfortunate. You know, I wish the left were more united, but it's not. Anyway, right, let's see if we can find something else. I'm saying there, my mum got me a good prank this morning. She had me looking for a dead bird. One of the cats hadn't actually brought in. Having your own equipment, Frankie, was bad then. Well, it was worse than that. I didn't even realise it was April the 1st. Since I've not been a teacher, I don't really pay attention to dates as much as I used to. And I fell for something on Twitter immediately. Someone pointed out it was April the 1st, and I basically said, right, I should probably just go away for a few hours. Because I won't be able to... You can't tell the difference between something stupid the Tories are doing and a deliberate April Fool. That's the problem. Anyway. Do I think Jeremy Corbyn and his brother, that would be Piers Corbyn, are on the same page about anything? No, I mean, Piers Corbyn is proper mad, isn't he? He's like a left-wing version of Lawrence Fox. He's completely doolally. He probably actually needs, in all seriousness, help. Starmer's going ahead with his Lord's Reform pledge by the looks of things. I tell you something, most of what he'll talk about is what voters want. The voters who will swing the election, because that's what he has to do. That's how you win an election. You focus on what voters, not yourself. It's not your own personal project. It's what voters want, right? The key voters, which is only like 1% of them, but you know, that can't be helped. But there are things he clearly wants, and what is very obvious is what he wants is to really reform Westminster, which is why I say we may not get it early. And I'm not saying we definitely get it, but I think there's a real window for proper electoral reform for the House of Commons. You know, I think, you know, House of Lords first. Obviously, that's easier said than done. We'll see how well it goes. But if that goes well, I can see something coming. As long as the Labour membership retains this real desire for proportional representation, and I think there's a very good chance they will, because they've seen. It used to be the case that you'd sort of think, oh, PR would be good for us when you're in opposition, can't win elections. Of course it's good for you because you can't win elections. But then when you're in power, you go, oh, maybe first past the post isn't so bad. But I think there's something... I think the Tories since 2010 have been so destructive, that I think people have realised that without proportional representation, it doesn't matter what Labour do. It's all gone. As soon as the Tories will come back. If you keep the electoral system the same, they will come back. Of course they'll come back. You can't stop it. And when they do, they'll just destroy it all. And I think people are now, you know... we'll do this last one on Corbyn, but we'll probably have to do other things as well. Is the accusation of anti-Semitism around Corbyn based simply on criticism of the Israeli government? No, not at all. I've often wondered myself how anti-Semitic Corbyn personally is, how much his ignorance and so on. One of his own advisors, I've forgotten his name now, he put it quite well. He had an interesting idea. Obviously, I'm not part of his inner circle. So really what's happened is you don't go Corbyn going around talking about a Jewish world order or anything like that. Although he has promoted a few things that have talked about it, but you could argue he was doing it accidentally. And I think what this guy reckoned where Corbyn's problem was Corbyn isn't anti-racist. People say, oh, he's anti-racist. He's not. He's clearly not. What he is anti-poverty. And the two things can often look similar because obviously in Britain, as well as some other countries like the US, but in Britain certainly, ethnic minorities tend to be much poorer than white people, and it becomes a poverty issue. So when you've got racism in the UK, it also tends to be a poverty issue, or rather it's poverty issues that cause racism, institutional racism. So what this guy said, really, the reason why Corbyn was anti certain types of racism but not others was really because he's anti-poverty, and he doesn't and this is anti-Semitic, of course, he views Jewish people as not really being poor, which itself is anti-Semitic because it's this idea of Jewish people all being rich, which is an absolute nonsense, of course. Did you never watch Fiddler on the Roof? But that's where it is. That's where it comes from for him. But the worst thing was not so much Corbyn's actions. The anti-Semitism within Labour under his watch was the protection of much more vocal and unpleasant anti-Semites. That was where the problem was. You would have people in Labour being recorded going off on, ranting on about, you know, the Jewish world order and things like that. Nothing to do with Israel, by the way. And although that would usually feature in their rants, and nothing would be done, even when they were recorded. And if there was, sometimes there'd be a lot of media pressure, and then he'd be forced to, you know, let the process deal with them. And then 6 months later, they'd be back in the party. That was the damage that was done. And the problem with that is, it's like Brexit and racism. Hate crimes in the UK increased since the Brexit referendum. Why? Because the racists were always there. But they always felt beforehand, or a lot of them felt, that society didn't welcome their views. So they were cowed. They kept themselves to themselves. All of a sudden, after the Brexit referendum, which everyone knew was about anti-immigration, it doesn't matter how many people say, oh no, I vote for other things. It really doesn't matter. It became known as an anti-immigration vote. So all the racists and xenophobes thought that all of a sudden the majority were on their side. So hate crimes were up because they felt they were part of the majority, the silent majority. It's a similar thing with anti-Semitism in Labour, because they were allowed to get away with it. Even when there's racism in Labour, there's racism in Labour now, and not all of it's been tackled properly. But what was happening is anti-Semites could get away with their behaviour so blatantly, really blatantly, to the point where they could be recorded and still nothing happened. And what that did is it increased the extremity of the behaviour. So it meant that Jewish people felt much more threatened, because the anti-Semites felt much more empowered. And that was the real damage that was being done. But anyway. Right, we'll move on then, because this is of limited use to anyone. It's one of these things. The Corbyn issue, I mean, I wish it would just go away, because it really should go away. I mean, here's the thing. You know, like Tony Blair, who actually won elections. He won elections and put things in place. And yet since he has not been Labour leader, has been a lot quieter than Jeremy Corbyn, who made us suffer the worst electoral defeat ever for Labour. Because in terms of the number of seats, you could argue, okay, the 1930s was worse, but Labour had just been in government then. So what that was Labour forming a government, making an arse of it, and then losing really badly, and the Tories coming back in. You know, like, what was the excuse in 2019? They'd been out of power for 9.5 years and still suffered a devastating loss. But there it is. There it is. But as I say, it's one of these issues that you've got some people will be a bit interested in it. The people who are most interested in it are the ones who are on the side of Corbyn, and they're not interested in what I've got to say about it, and it's all very boring for everyone else. I've opened a can of worms there. I do that. I mean, this is welcome to politics. Welcome to politics. But we should probably talk about other things as well, because it does get boring for most people. I've got no idea what I'm going to call this on the thingy video as well, when it actually is not live. We'll just make it up. Martin Ford's complaint about Starmer's not responded to the report yet. How is that acceptable? Well, of course he's responded to the report. What Martin Ford is saying is he wants to continue to be part of a process. He's just complaining, that's all. The recommendations in the report are being implemented. You know, he's just complaining that because he wants to oversee, he wants to oversee them. He was given a job because he had certain expertise in that job. You know, he's now done his job. He's basically like someone you get in to tile your hallway, and then they come back the next day wanting to do something in the kitchen. It's like, well, no, you've done what I asked you to do, thank you very much. And then they go off complaining that you won't let them do your kitchen. That's what Martin Ford is. He may have some good reason for being concerned. He may not, I don't know. But, you know, you can't say that he has just because he's whining. And given that Martin Ford KC's report was very much attacking factionalism in the Labour Party, I find it highly suspicious that he is now complaining by trying to use one of those factions in Labour to give himself a wider platform. That's just a bit hypocritical. So I'm turning off him a little bit here. But anyway, Saturday's random politics chat. It is very random at the moment. To begin with, it wasn't even chat because there was no sound. The NEC is full of Starmer's cronies. No, it's not. The NEC always has a majority of people who are aligned with the leader because the leader appoints them. Jeremy Corbyn had far more people in the NEC who did everything he said. It's not just that they were on his side, they were his slaves. But again, we keep going on, you keep dragging me in. Something else. What are we going to talk about? Something else. Something more useful. We've actually, you know, again, this is what I mean, I keep saying as well. It's like the... Phil down there, different Phil, not me. It's always been a Starmer fan club saying that Starmer can do wrong. This is absolutely not. This is the thing, you see. You ask someone who supports Jeremy Corbyn to criticise Jeremy Corbyn, they can't do it. I criticise Starmer quite a lot. But I will do it a lot less at the moment because at the end of the day, he's winning. It's really that simple. A political leader who's winning is deserving of far less criticism and is deserving of far more faith than one who is losing. So when you've actually got a situation, in fact, I saw there's an event somewhere I saw advertised. It's to discuss how great Jeremy Corbyn is, and it explicitly states that when you get a ticket, you have to sign up to say that you are a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, and if they discover you are not, you will be removed. You will not be allowed entry, and you'll be removed if they found out after it. That is what you call a cult. You don't have anything like that for Starmer. Is there a useful strategy for redeveloping the North? Yes. I mean, again, this is, so when we talk about policies that you hear, the ones that they're shouting the loudest, that's because they're designed to target certain types of voter. But Starmer's personal raison d'etre for being in politics is literally getting power so he can remove it. And there's pitfalls to this. As I say, it's easier said than done. But his main project is to actually make sure that different parts of the country are empowered to make more decisions for themselves. Because the problem we have at the moment in terms of public investment is it's so, not all of it, but the vast majority of it is made from Westminster. And there's two issues with that. First of all, you inevitably then focus a lot of that investment in the areas that are strategically important to the party of government. But the other problem is that you want a return for it because the focus is on the economy, isn't it? GDP. So, and Boris Johnson said this himself when he was mayor of London, and he was right. And it is a tricky one to solve. It's, you know, for money there are parts of the country in the south, mostly the southeast of England and London. You invest money there, you get a better return than if you invest it in the North Midlands or Wales or the north of England. And that's the difficulty. So if you make decisions centrally in the interests of the overall country, you will focus on balance sheets and you will focus on what is best for overall GDP. And that is important when it comes to elections. But what it means is the haves will keep getting, because they've got the resources to turn that investment into a bigger return, and the have-nots will carry on having not because they don't have the resources. So the idea is to, and again, it's very, the blueprint for this is very much Gordon Brown's paper. The idea is to remove more of that central decision making to regions. Again, it's easier said than done. It is easier said than done. Do I agree that if Labour didn't back a second EU referendum, they'd have lost even more seats? They would have lost a lot of... So, yeah, so what happened in 2017, because Labour got a lot of votes there, a lot of them came from the Lib Dems and the Greens because they wanted to stop Brexit, and they were willing to vote Labour to stop Brexit. They, even though Labour were not on a platform of stopping Brexit, they sort of knew that what Labour were promising would inevitably result in stopping it. Realistically, Labour had no plan to leave the EU and could never really do it. In 2019, a lot of them were sick of it because Jeremy Corbyn, despite promising a referendum with leave as an option, remain as an option, held off from doing so for many months, even after the conditions had been met that he agreed to. So they sort of lost faith, but nonetheless, some of them still did, because some of them were still aware that come the 2019 election, Labour were promising a referendum with Remain as an option. So they still garnered a certain number of votes to stop Brexit. And if they had not promised that, then they would have lost more votes. Now, how many seats that would have translated into is tricky. But given that Labour only held on to a good number of seats, 20 to 30 seats, narrowly, then it is entirely possible that they could have lost even more badly, yes, if they hadn't offered that, that Remain option. The unfortunate thing is that more people didn't just do what they did in 2017, because Labour were, although it was a bit of a nonsense policy, their policy was, we're going to negotiate a different deal with the EU, we'll take 3 months over it, and then we'll put it to the public. And they couldn't even say whether they would back their own deal. It was a bit of a nonsense. But what people should have focused on was they were committing to a referendum. And it wasn't like years down the line. They said 3 months negotiating with the EU. Then they would legislate for another referendum. So the referendum then takes place, another 3 months later? Maybe 6 months at the outside. So in the first year of a Labour government, they were basically promising a referendum and Remain would be an option. That was how you stopped it. But, people didn't. And this is why, I don't know whether people have seen it. So, Steve Bray, maybe I could find it. Has anyone seen Wes Streeting talking to Steve Bray this week? Because this was quite interesting. He was quite interesting because, people will know I'm not a fan of Wes Streeting at all. It's unnecessarily divisive. And he actually sought out Steve Bray didn't corner him like he does Tory MPs. Wes Streeting crossed a street to actually approach Steve Bray. Went straight for him. Very cheerful. And he was talking about, and he knew Steve Bray was going to ask about Brexit. Of course he was. It's his thing. And he was quite happy to talk about it. And the thing that Streeting said was, when Bray was saying, look, we need to rejoin single market customs union, don't we? He said, look, we tried. We lost 2 general elections and a referendum. So therefore, clearly aligning himself with Remain, he said, we lost 2 general elections and a referendum. Voting matters. What Wes Streeting was basically saying was, if people had have wanted to leave the EU, to remain in the EU in 2019, they should have voted I mean, he will say they should have voted Labour. In reality, it depends which seat you're in. But what they should have done was to vote against the Conservatives. And not enough did. I mean, that's what people needed to do. That was joining the EU is a lot harder than not leaving it in the first place. And that is the situation we're in. You know, there's a lot of people say they can have no sympathy for leavers, people who voted leave. What I say is you can't have that attitude, because although I know I talk about a lot of them are dying off because they're elderly. You can't have that attitude, because in order to go from a losing position to a winning position in politics, you have to bring your opponents on your side. What are Labour doing to win the next election? They're trying to persuade people who were voting Conservative. They can try and persuade people who don't vote at all, but that's really hard because they don't vote. You might get some. But if you can persuade people who for the last 13 years have voted Conservative, but before that were voting Labour, they're people who will flip. You're just trying to persuade those people to flip back to you. Then you can win. But what Streeting was basically saying, he said voting matters. This is why voting matters. People should remember that for the next general election. So in 2019, people had the chance to stop Brexit. And what they had to do was, doesn't matter how much they disliked Jeremy Corbyn or anyone else, what they had to do, if they were in a seat that was between Labour and the Conservatives, they had to vote Labour. If they were in a seat that was between the Lib Dems and the Conservatives, they had to vote Lib Dem. If it was a seat between the Conservatives and the SNP, they had to vote for the SNP. If people were that desperate to stay in the EU, that's what they needed to do, and they didn't. So now what people need to do is, if they want to, I don't want to say the phrase make Brexit better, but if they want to get back on the path, they're going to have to, again, vote for whichever candidate is best placed to get rid of the Conservatives. And that's the case in every election. Should there be a referendum on joining the CPTPP? There should have been, shouldn't there? Or at least it should have been a manifesto promise. It wasn't in the manifesto, and it can be either. It doesn't have to be a referendum. I mean, we don't usually have referenda in this country. I know we've been treated to a few in the last decade. A manifesto promise is considered perfectly adequate as a mandate. It wasn't in the manifesto. There wasn't even a hint of it in the manifesto. So the public have not been consulted at all. And again, what does the CPTPP do? Overall, they say it's a boost of 0.08% in 10 years' time. Great, nice one. But it's not very nice for farmers, and it's not very nice for people in the car manufacturing industry. But do you know what? Brexit's not very nice for them either. In fact, it's really weird, because if you think about car manufacturing, a lot of that's in the red wall seats that the Tories won in 2019. You'd think the Tories don't want to screw those over. You think about farming, a lot of that's in the sort of more traditional Conservative rural heartlands. You would think the Conservatives don't want to screw farmers over. But here we are in a world where the Conservatives are screwing over both manufacturing, car manufacturing, because the CPTPP does that no good at all, and screwing over agriculture. And yet, despite that, and this is because the media are so firmly on the side of the Conservatives, despite that, Labour still have to work and be very, very focused to win the next election. It should be a cakewalk for them. The Conservatives are literally screwing over everyone. Everyone. If you were to get all the people whom the Conservatives are actually helping, and you were to get them to live in the same constituency, there wouldn't be enough of them to even win that one seat. And this is the power of the media, that it's getting people to massively vote against their own interests. The fact that the Conservatives could potentially win the next election is ridiculous, and it will only be stopped by Labour focusing on those key voters more so, because you could say, will it be stopped by people realising that they didn't vote the right way in 2015, 2017, 2019, I mean, 2015, if more people had voted Labour, we could have had chaos with Ed Miliband. That was an offer. Chaos with Ed Miliband. Sounds quite nice. I'd still be a teacher. Everything would be lovely. But there we go. Anyway, I'm missing all the comments now. Carol Vorderman would make a good MP. She certainly holds them to account. Often, though, that can make you a very bad MP. Because you have to work with others and be quite pragmatic. And as a good MP has to actually understand that what's important is not them or the truth as they see it, but the truth as their voters see it. So people who are very, like, you know, if I give you some examples, Clive Lewis, superb MP for speaking truth to power. Dawn Butler, but they're shit for the purposes of forming governments, because they refuse to be more discreet. Carol Vorderman would be like them. She'd be a backbench MP. Well, I don't know that. Maybe she would be more pragmatic. Obviously, she's like me. I mean, the thing is, if I were an MP, I would be more discreet as an MP because I would understand how to play the game. Maybe Carol Vorderman would as well. The only reason I don't have to play the game is because I'm not an MP or a politician, nor do I have any desire to be. If people had voted Labour to support the EU in 2019, they'd have boosted Jeremy Corbyn, who you know is a Brexiteer. Yeah, he is a Brexiteer, but he was a Brexiteer in charge of a Remain party. Jeremy Corbyn did not want to promise a referendum with Remain as an option, but he did. Why? Because his party wanted it. Even Landsman, the guy who was running Momentum at the time, was pro-EU. The Lexiteers were loud, but they were not very many. We'd have with Jeremy, and I know it sounds bizarre. Jeremy Corbyn was a Brexiteer, but he would have been the Prime Minister who would have stopped us leaving the EU. But that is the fact of the matter. And 3 months, do you think in 3 months he would have come up with a withdrawal agreement that would have been satisfactory to the Labour Party? Behave yourself. Not a chance. Because at the end of the day, if you want to leave the customs union, it is interesting. I mean, would Labour have at least wanted to remain part of the single market? But they wouldn't have come up with any deal that would have been acceptable to Parliament. There was no deal acceptable to Parliament other than staying. Starmer needs Murdoch's backing to guarantee a win in 2024. Well, that's bad luck, because Starmer has not only... Murdoch hates Starmer. Starmer tried to convict Rebecca Brooks when he was DPP over the phone hacking scandal. There's no love lost between them, and Starmer at the moment seems to be doing perfectly well without trying to get on Murdoch's good side. So no, that is one of the main benefits of Starmer as leader, that he is absolutely, it's one of his little crusades, the way the media behaved. He absolutely is outraged at it. And there will be media regulation coming. There'll be news media regulation coming under Starmer. You mark my words. But again, it's not one of the ones that gets shouted about, because it's not something that's going to win over voters. You know, as I was saying I did a live stream with Graham Hughes on he's rebranded his channel as Labour Social. And you know, and I said, you know, in a manifesto, you've got 2 types of thing in a manifesto. You've got the things you need that will win your votes. You've got the policies that the voters want to see, so you put those in. And then you've got the policies that you as the leadership, the policy groups that run that party, think will be good for the country. And press regulation will be in there. It just won't be shouted out much. Blair won due to support from Murdoch. No, he didn't. But I will say that he felt he needed it. He didn't need it. He felt he needed it. It's just like in 2015, David Cameron agreed to the Brexit referendum in the manifesto because his MPs thought that UKIP presented a threat to them. they overestimated the threat from UKIP. They overestimated it. I think David Cameron knew it was an overblown threat as well, but his MPs, you know, he was too weak to just say to his MPs, don't be bloody stupid. And that's it. So perceptions, you know, in politics, perception decides things, but it's not always true. Stephen, they're saying, I read that you need to give 6 months notice to leave. I assume this is the CPTPP. That is correct. It's incredibly easy to leave. It was not easy to leave the EU because so many of our laws were underpinned by like being member of the single market and customs union. So much of our trade was underpinned by it. So much of our freedoms, everything. CPTPP is basically a trade. It's a free trade agreement. That's all it is. It's just a free trade agreement. And remember, a free trade agreement doesn't even include free trade. It's a bit of a misnomer. It shouldn't be called it, really. It just means a mostly tariff-free trade agreement. That's all it is. So there's nothing really. We don't have to do anything to leave. We just have to give 6 months notice. Like when we had to leave the EU, we had to copy across a load of legislation so that it didn't disappear in a fart as soon as we left. We don't have to do that to leave the CPTPP. We just say 6 months notice and then you go. Finished. Done. Joe Swinson, I think you may, refused to accept Corbyn as PM for unity government. It doesn't matter though, because it made no difference whether she'd have accepted him or not. You're dragging me back in. The Tory MPs wouldn't have accepted it. To form this government of national unity, it required some Tory MPs, and Tory MPs were willing to do it, and they were willing to do it with a Labour Prime Minister, just not Corbyn. The person who stopped that government of national unity was one man, Jeremy Corbyn. I understand why he wouldn't have gone for someone like Harriet Harman, who would have been acceptable to all the other wings. I get he's Labour leader. He shouldn't be part of a mostly Labour government where he's not the Prime Minister. I get that. But he could have nominated Caroline Lucas. Where's the problem with that? Where is the problem? People would have agreed to serve under Caroline Lucas. In fact, Caroline Lucas was the ideal candidate because she's in a party of one MP, so she can't be seen to be shown any favouritism. Easy. It doesn't matter how many times people try and spin it. I'm sorry. Jeremy Corbyn is a man who does not take responsibility for his actions. His ego prevented it. He could have had, I mean, it was really this simple. The summer of 2019, government of national unity. Boris Johnson's the leader of the opposition, right? Labour could have had the pick of cabinet positions. You could have had John McDonnell as Chancellor. You could have had someone, you could have had a Labour Education Secretary, a Labour Health Secretary. And then with Labour policies, you could have started to get investment going back in. You know, obviously the government was only supposed to last for this people's vote, but that would have taken 9 months or so. In the meantime, Labour could prove that they were competent in government, because there's other matters of government. They had a chance. They were given a chance. And then there'd have been an election, and Labour could have, people then could have seen, oh, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour isn't the big monster we were told it would be. Well then. But no. Didn't want that. Didn't want it. But there it is. Right, okay. Why did the Sun change their position? Labour from, if Kinnock wins today, will the last person to leave Britain turn out lights, to supporting Blair in 97, to teach the Conservatives a lesson. Because Murdoch wanted John Major deposed. Didn't like him. And the Conservatives stuck with him. So what Rupert Murdoch did. Now don't get me wrong, Blair got himself very close to Murdoch, don't get me wrong. And again, I didn't like that. And the reason I say I don't like it is not because, you know, it's one of those dirty political games that had to be done. I don't think it did have to be done. But nonetheless, Murdoch was doing it, because if you look at front pages from the Sun supporting Blair, you'll find one. If you find front pages of the Sun that have Tony Blair on the front, you will find an awful lot attacking him. In fact, The Sun described Tony Blair as the most dangerous man in Britain. That's not the sort of support that I think you're alluding to there. You know, the Sun turned on him as soon as they got rid of John Major. I mean, they didn't have to get rid of John Major. John Major resigned. In fact, the day of the general election results, John Major was straight down to the cricket club, his local cricket club, because he likes his cricket. But there we are. Voting Labour is the only way to get rid of the Tories. Well, mostly. I will say it's a case of looking at the seat and who is most likely to win it. So there are seats where it's most likely to be the Liberal Democrats. There are seats where it's most likely to be Plaid or the SNP. I don't think there is actually a seat where the Green Party is best placed, other than Brighton, which is held by the Greens. Yeah, there's but it is mostly Labour. In most seats where the Conservatives have a chance of winning it, the candidate that can stop them is the Labour candidate, right? And for people who may even think that their seat is really safe, I mean, in reality, yeah, most seats are really safe. But there's always more people don't vote than is needed to get rid of any majority. You know, when you look at an MP, a Tory MP, they get 70% of the votes. They've got no chance of displacing them. And you think, yeah, but if you look at the number of people in that seat who don't vote, if they all turned out to vote and they all voted for the second place candidate, don't matter how far behind they are, there's enough of them to overtake it. Is there a precedent to join the EU without a vote? I don't know. There can't be. See, I would think it's probably impossible, because one of the requirements to join the EU is to have a democratic system. And how can you have a democratic system that wouldn't ask the people something really important like this? You wouldn't necessarily have to have a referendum, but there has to be some public mandate. It can include a manifesto promise. But all you can promise in the manifesto is to approach the EU for talks. You can't even guarantee the talks, because the EU could say no. And as I say, right now, the EU would say no. So we have to, first of all, repair our reputational damage. That was something else Wes Streeting was saying to Bray. Do you know what? That mini interview with Wes Streeting of Steve Bray, it was the first time in, I can't remember how long, where I've actually listened to Wes Streeting talk and think, I'm glad you actually opened your mouth there. Because every other time, even when he's explaining policies that are fine, like, people say he's a good communicator. I think he's a very bad communicator, because I think he fails to emphasize the benefits of the policies. But anyway, maybe that's just me. Did I hear Ken Clarke saying on Sky a while back that small state conservatism is dead? I don't remember. But I mean, any political idea is only dead for a little while. It's soon resurrected, isn't it? It's the Tories at the moment are in a cul-de-sac. They're going to have to learn at some point that what they're doing at the moment isn't going to work to win them power again. And you know, the Tories are not going to come back to power without either Labour dropping the ball massively or them sorting themselves out. And I think they'll lack the... See, one thing is Labour, and this is a real weakness of Labour and a strength of the Conservatives, Labour seem to accept being in opposition for a very long time. They will put up with being in opposition for a very long time. And it's maddening. Whereas the Conservatives will not. They don't tolerate ever being in opposition. And they get increasingly impatient. You know, they, for example, when they lost power to Blair in 97, they appointed William Hague as leader. William Hague's a perfectly good leader. He was just there at the wrong time. But when he lost the general election in 2001, he stepped down. There's no reason for him to step down. He hadn't done anything terribly wrong. He just lost because Labour had just come to power. They had a very focused leadership and they were actually doing really well with the economy. Of course, the Conservatives were going to lose. Nothing to do. No leader would have got a win there. But they didn't. They got rid of him. Stupid. No need for it. But it's a sign of their ruthlessness and impatience. And that's quite... I mean, yeah, they went for Ian Duncan Smith, which was not the smart... I didn't say they were smart, but they are ruthless and impatient for power. And I wish Labour were a little bit more like that. Labour only get like that when they've been out of power for a long time. So if you look at the really ruthless... Think about ruthless Labour MPs. Who have we got? We've got Harold Wilson, Tony Blair, and now Keir Starmer. And all of those people have... I mean, Starmer hasn't won yet. But all of those people will have won after a long period of Conservative government. And that is because it takes that long for the for the Labour membership to get sick of losing, because Labour will lose an election and go, oh, let's go for the next muppet in charge. They'll lose another election. Oh, that's bad luck. And but there comes a point where even the Labour membership just gets sick of it. When I was at the local Labour Party meeting and we were deciding who we should back as candidate. So at the time it was Rebecca Long Bailey, Lisa Nandy, Keir Starmer. I think Emily Thornberry was still in it. And there were so many people standing up saying they were going to back Keir Starmer, not because they were big fans of what he had to say. They were standing up and saying, I'm going to back Keir Starmer because I'm sick of losing. And some of them were quite elderly, and some of them were saying, I want to see another Labour government before I die. And that's sort of what it felt like in that meeting. I'm sure it was the same in lots of others around the country. It was just people deciding that they wanted to win and they were going to back the leader that was most likely to win, not the leader that spoke to their policy preferences. All of a sudden they've been in opposition for so long that that's a luxury, and it is a luxury. You don't back the leader that matches your policy preferences the most. You back the leader who's going to win. I stood up in that meeting and I said, you know, the problem is when you're choosing a leader, you need to choose the leader that's going to win over the people. At the time it'd been 9 years. I said you need to, or just over 9 years, you need to win over the people who've been voting Tory for the last decade but were voting Labour before that. And I said everyone in this room will go off to a ballot box and put a cross in the box next to the Labour candidate. I said if you put a red rosette on a chimp, everyone in this room will vote for it. And we need a leader who doesn't appeal to us, because any leader will get our vote. I said you need to appeal to people who are more choosy. But anyway. Clement Attlee had his moments too. Absolutely, yes. Yeah. But the real hard-nosed Labour leaders in history have been Harold Wilson, Tony Blair, and now Keir Starmer, because there are downs. As I say, he's not like Blair and Wilson could at least do the speech. Starmer's not got that in him. And that was a huge worry for me for quite a long time. He's like, he's not going to come across well he's not a orator at all. And he's improved. He has got better, but he's never going to be an orator. And you sort of feel you want that of a politician, and he's not got it. But he is absolutely ruthless. My goodness me. Bloody hell, he is. Starmer saying he's going to be ruthless in the run to next general election. Well, we can see that he already has. I don't think we need him to say so. He already has. He's made that quite clear. Don't worry if I've missed your comments. I don't. It always happens as it ends. There's so many comments, I'm afraid, and it all got very confused at the start when I wasn't even talking to you. Blair managed to win 355 seats with 35% of the vote in 2005. Yeah, well, this is, see, this, I mean, that was a piss take, wasn't it? Absolute piss take. But it is, again, a mark of just how focused Labour were back then. They won a majority, a good, I mean, that is, that's nearly a 70-seat majority. That's almost the same majority as the Tories have now. In 2005, and that's after he's been in power for 2 terms already. That's a 3rd term majority, nearly 70, huge. And yeah, as you say, it was like just over a third of voters, of people actually voting, not even the electorate, of the people who turned up to vote. That's how focused they were, and they just then lost that focus. They didn't, you know, they got complacent. They did what the Conservatives are doing now. They got complacent. The Conservatives have just, you've got to remember, well, you may not know, but I worked it out recently. 3/4 of all Tory MPs right now, 3/4 of them have never known opposition. They were not MPs when Labour were in power. 3/4 of all Tory MPs right now only won their seats either in 2010 when the wind was changing, or since. So they don't know what it's like to have to win from opposition. They've no idea. So 3/4 of them have never looked like losing an election. So they get complacent. The same thing will happen to Labour again. Labour right now are the opposite. They're more focused because they've been in opposition for so long and they've seen such damage being done. And what will happen is, unless we get proportional representation, or even if we do, there's going to come a point where, so Labour will be focused now, and they'll be focused after the 1st term, but the focus will disappear. Eventually they'll get complacent and then they'll lose. Or if it's at least proportional representation, they'll at least lose a good chunk of seats, you know. Thatcher at the end of her time had pissed off the populace by the time Major got in. Yeah, but that's what they did then, isn't it? They got rid of her. They made the problem her, not the Conservatives. Then John Major came in and won. And, you know, it was decent. I mean, it wasn't a massive majority, but it was perfectly good enough for his purposes. And that's, you know, again, that's why the Conservatives will absolutely get rid of the leader if they're going to lose them the election. They're totally ruthless, utterly ruthless. Right, last few. We're finishing a bit late because we did start a bit late, effectively. If this country had proper devolution, would the against argument of lack of local representation in Westminster under PR become weak or even disappear? It should, yeah. I mean, I sort of say the issue with the UK, the reason why there's so much antagonism, is because we are effectively a federal country without a federal government. That's the problem. You know, so what we need to do is we need to be more federal, and hopefully that's what Starmer intends. Now, as I say, intending it is one thing, doing it is another. Reforming government is incredibly difficult. It is not easy. People have tried it and failed. Blair tried and failed. You know, you can sort of imagine that everything Blair wanted to do he did, but he didn't, because he wanted to devolve much more power than he was able to, and he wasn't able to do it. So this is, you know, so we need Starmer to have a better plan. Hopefully he's got a better plan. But it sometimes reminds me of the old Eddie Izzard joke when he's talking about, you know, the Nazis invading Russia, and he's going, you know, the problem is they sort of forgot that Napoleon had tried it. Napoleon went into Russia and said, I've got a great idea. Oh, it's a bit cold, runs away. Then Hitler goes in going, I've got a better idea, got a better idea, got a better idea. Oh, it's the same idea, it's the same idea, it's the same idea. And I do worry that although Starmer is very, very keen on removing a lot of power from Westminster, it has been tried before. Okay, Blair didn't try it to the extent that Starmer's wanting to, but it has been tried before, and it has failed before. So we need it to be a better idea. So we will see. We'll see. Is this how my lessons went, Phil? No, you can't rabbit on for lessons. I was a teacher, not a lecturer. I'm not allowed to just rabbit on. In fact, you daren't rabbit on, because teenagers have not got the attention span. So you can talk to them, you've limited amount of time to talk to them. As a science teacher, I used to be able to sneak an extra minute, because all you had to do was set fire to something and you would hold their attention for a little bit more. In fact, I had a colleague who he was Australian, so he was already a little bit, unhinged. And what he would do with his bottom set class is, if he was trying to get their attention, he would just get some lighter fluid and he'd just pour it on his bench, his science bench, inflammable, flame resistant. And he would just pour lighter fluid on his bench and he would just chuck a match on it, and all of a sudden they'd be paying attention. But you can't talk to them for very long because their attention soon goes. So you have to get them doing things. So yeah, you can't rabbit on as a teacher. Labour need to put PR in their next manifesto. No. It really depends whether it's vote positive or not. But as I've said, strategically, they're better off with it in the second manifesto. But we will see. We will see. Right, last few really quickly. Starmer could win a higher vote share than Blair and still win fewer seats. Yes, absolutely. Again, it's not about how many votes you win. It's about how many seats you win. And with first past the post, it's not the same thing. I mean, you see the same thing in the American presidential system. Democrats almost always win the popular vote. That should be it. Should be as simple as that. But Republicans win about half the time. The madness of first past the post. Because it means that certain areas become more important and certain types of voters become more important, which is inherently undemocratic, because it means not everyone has an equal vote. In theory, it's one person, one vote, but some people's vote counts for more. Some people's vote counts for nothing. But there it is. So we'll call it there. As I said, just a reminder, we won't be here next Saturday, but I will put up a link to the stream on Thursday. I'll try and do it fair in advance. It won't be tonight, but I'll try and do it tomorrow if I can remember. So you've got plenty of notes, because obviously it's going to be a different day. But at the same time though, because I'm leaving the house on Easter weekend and going somewhere else. But thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a good evening, and until next time, I will see you later.